Hey everybody, welcome to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts, Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that you subscribe, leave a comment or review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And today with that, we're going to get into our episode. We're talking about why your best idea happens away from the desk. And basically what we're talking about, we're going to dive into the psychology of how your mind actually generates innovative ideas and learn why some of the most profitable insights come from just casual, entirely unrelated activities, and how to relax your mind so that you can connect the dots and, find the answers that you've been searching for. So we're going to break that down a little bit more in depth. And with that, I want to go ahead and bring on our co-host, Joseph. Joseph, say what's up and take it away.
Hey everybody, how's it going? So today I wanted to talk about ideas. Just to be transparent, because I was kind of struggling to come up with ideas, and it kind of dawned on me that I had this conversation last week where I was talking to my buddy and I was saying, like it's very hard to come up with ideas whenever you tell yourself to come up with ideas. So, I wanted to talk about or have an episode dedicated to, you have to relax to come up with ideas, or you have to step away, or, there's a lot of different ways to kind of like jog your mind to come up with ideas and not under the or like not come up with ideas under pressure.
Absolutely. And it's funny you bring this up, Joe, because I was thinking about this today. We all have a lot of ideas that we come up with, you know what I mean? And a lot of times they're great ideas. Sometimes we execute on them and we get them going, but we never follow through on them, and I was thinking about this today and I'm like, a lot of times I think for myself, and I'm just going to say for me, is the ideas come and I get so excited, and I think the dopamine rush of it, like, just, gets me so fired up and going that, like, I just stay stuck in that idea moment, and then nothing happens and I'm on to the next idea. And I find myself looking at, like, well, what's really happening? You know what I mean? So, what I come to find out is, like, when you do too many things, and I've said it before, right? He who chases many rabbits catches none. So I think a lot of times our minds, because we're at a stage in this world right now where technology is rampant and you can do pretty much anything, and everything that you couldn't do 10, 15 years ago. You know what I mean? So I think with that, for me, I think, relaxing your mind and just finding that time to slow down a little bit, I think that the good ideas will come.
Exactly. And, I kind of want to bring about, it's kind of the antithesis of what you're saying, the stagnant mind, where like, where you are pretty much just focusing only on your realm of influence, or your current environment, right? So I've had this problem before where like I've since I was a kid, I've known that I've wanted to come up with an app. I've wanted to, like, come make apps or whatever. And so I was like, well, every idea that I have has already been made, but it's once you start looking outside of, like, okay, well, what can an app do? Or oh, I want to, like, solve the light bulb, or I want to turn, like, all of the things that you're kind of already thinking about, someone has already thought about. But that's because you're very limited on what you know, because you only know what you know. But if you if you start talking to your friends, or maybe even a colleague, and they have, like, this one problem that they have, well, you're like, huh, I can automate that. And then that automation can become an app. And that whole idea spawned from somewhere entirely different from your own environment.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, you know what I mean? Like, when you're a creative person, you're always on the lookout. So that's why it feels like I don't have the idea. I don't have it yet. You know what I mean? And it's not because it's not there. For me, sometimes I feel like I know it's just right there, like, just out of my reach. Like, I can't see it. You know what I mean? So sometimes we get caught up in that tunnel vision, where we're just grinding away, every day. And we're thinking, like, we sometimes we just as creatives take that for granted, right? Like, oh, everybody knows this, everybody's using it. But the reality is not everybody is doing it, and not everybody's thinking like that. If you look around, you'll see that they're still doing the same old mundane things. The thing that can be automated, they're still manually doing it. And it's like, why are you doing that? You know what I mean? It's like trying to cut a tree down with a dull axe. Like, sharpen up the axe, dude. You can knock that tree down quick. And that's kind of like what we're talking about, you know what I mean? But a lot of times when you're so caught up in it, and you're just involved, this happens to us, so I don't know. I just kind of feel like the stagnant mind, you know what I mean, happens because we're always looking for the next shiny object syndrome. And we talked about that before. So I think just take a little bit of time, you know what I mean? Relax your mind and have conversations with people. And what we're talking about, you're going to be able to connect the dots. Like, it's just going to come to you, and it's going to be like that aha moment.
Exactly. And like Henry just said, right, the aha moment is once you step out of your comfort zone. Because again, let's say you want to make an app, but let's say, for me, for example, right, I'm not really much of an active person. But if I were to talk to people who are a little bit more active, let's say a hiker, right? How many people are going to be making apps for hikers, right? And so, once I step out of my comfort zone and get, the feel for what people are doing outside of what I know, well, there's probably going to be a lot more opportunities, in the form of an app. But let's say we pivot to like another concept, like let's say you're dealing with like customer relations or even human relations, right? Let's say your employee has a lot of issues with his wife or whatever. How are you going to deal with that? How are you going to deal with boosting their productivity? Well, you have to like look outside of their purview to be like, okay, well, honestly, I was going to pull something out of my butt, but you have to come up with a strategy to help him help himself, right? Because again, if you just look at like, oh, well, you two just separate, right? That's very narrow minded. And so you have to come up with more creative ideas and creative tasks to help him help himself. But all of that to say is you have to, again, know to embrace like the unknown, essentially, right? Because if you can't embrace the unknown, or if you can't embrace like something that you don't know, and obviously it's hard to be like, oh, well, accept what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. But at the same time, like what Henry was saying, like we know that the idea is at the tip of our head, instead of the tip of our tongue. But it's all, the idea is just floating out there. Like it can very well come to us.
Absolutely. And it just comes again by almost by, I'll say, by proximity. Joe's saying, about getting out there, right? So like, if you get out there and you hike, then the idea is going to come to you. Like golf, for instance. I golf, and a company decided, hey, we can use the technology. So they took GPSs and they mapped out different golf courses, and now they created rangefinders, right? And that used to be a thing. Now it's an app. They can load it on your phone. So they're utilizing the technology. And it's just probably because somebody that golfed wanted to have this data to help them, So same thing like Joe's saying, if it's a relational thing, and you need help, sometimes, an app might be that ticket rather than just saying scrap the relationship. It's like, no, dude, you got to put in, to get out. So by proximity, those ideas are going to come because you're hearing the need, you know what I mean? So if you don't have ideas, the problem isn't that you don't have ideas. The problem is you're not seeing a need that you can fill with your creativity, with the tools and the abilities, because we all have talents, and the reality is the reason why we're not utilizing and tapping into our talents to the full potential, it's because we don't see the need. And that's the real problem. And a lot of times when you're caught up, let's say for instance, bills are piling up every month, relationships are stressing you out, all these things are taking place. So isolation, all these things that we've talked about in the past, like start to compound on you, and it's like, oh, dang, I can't really think clearly, right? So how can you do this? Relax your mind. How do I relax my mind? Maybe take a walk, take a journal out and write down, reading, listening to music. We've talked about these things in the past, so these are the things that keep us stuck in that comfort zone. So in order for us to get out and break free, we have to get out there and put ourselves out there and being available to learn, guys. That's the thing, So for me, that's what I've learned is that when I get out there, a lot of times it's the random stuff too. Like I might go somewhere and just talk to a stranger and they're having a bad day and they're telling you their problem and you're like, oh wow, you know what? That's an easy fix. Let's try this, and this, and it generally helps. And then, you build a relationship and something transpires.
Exactly. And, I kind of want to pivot to, there is a lot of importance and there is a lot of value from copying your customer or your competitors, but there is also a danger to copying your competitors because, again, let's say you run a burger joint, right? Well, if you just copy what every other burger joint does, you're just going to become another burger joint. But let's say, maybe if you take from like a sporting goods store, maybe they do something a little bit different or whatever. If you grab from other areas or niches or markets, you're going to add a whole different spin. That's kind of why food places, they'll have different fusion things, right? Maybe it's Southern fusion with Asian with the Asian flair, or maybe pizza from like a Middle Eastern pizza, or like a KG barbecue, the Austin joint, where it's a barbecue place, but it has Egyptian flair to it, right? So things that you wouldn't think would work together, they can very well work together. And that is all from just looking outside of the norm. Because if the guy who made KG barbecue, he was from Egypt, he visited the States and he really liked barbecue, but if he just became another barbecue place, he would have never seen the success that he is. He's one of the most renowned barbecue places in Austin because of it, right? Because again, it was like a combination that no one really thought about, but he thought about it, and now it's blown up.
Yeah, and you know what the thing is that there's nothing new under the sun, guys, right? You know what I mean? You heard the term before, don't reinvent the wheel. So like the reality is copying or seeing it like that, like Joe just said, a burger place, right? Even a tire, anything, like anything that's out there. The reason why, it's we have this free enterprise, but everybody does it just a little bit different. So it's the quality that comes down to it. You know what I mean? So like you're always going to have something, but it's not a clone. It's it's a spin-off of something else, So you could see all the brands that are out there, Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. You have some that are for this and some are for that, but it's just a different ingredients or the different way that they provide for the customer. So, with that, it's, take advantage, use it to your advantage, and make it happen. You know what I mean? So like the whole thing is like whenever you're doing something, always look at it. And we talked about this again before, is the blue ocean strategy. When you have a mindset like that, it's like, okay, well, I have this company here, but this is how our company's different, or how our service is different, and that's something that I pride myself on. And I'll just share an example with that, like I deal with what's kept me in business for a long time is my customer service. You know what I mean? My quality, and I don't compromise it. Even if I give a reduced cost, let's say if it's a very low cost of a job and a big job comes along, I don't toss the small job just because I got a big one sitting there. Like, hey, they're gonna pay more for me to go now. It's like, nah, once I make a commitment. So that type of value is important. You know what I mean? And that's what matters, is the value that you're providing for your customer. But yeah, and it's just There's plenty of room for everybody.
Exactly. And also, this next point kind of brings me to a Netflix docuseries that I was watching. It was about artists. And this one guy, he was talking about how he likes to have a very structured process whenever he tries to make new art because, as an artist, your whole job is for you to be creative. But if you tap up all of your creative juices, how do you make more, right? How do you come up with new ideas? Kind of like if you're an inventor, you're like, okay, well, what next? What's next, right? Well, it's because you're holding onto the myth, or you're making the myth of I have to make an original invention, right? And so, you don't always have to come up with something new. You can just, like what Henry was just saying, make a small change, make it branded for you, even in the content game, right? Even though we're a podcast, we're a mindset podcast, we add a unique spin because I mean our main biggest spin is we cover the young generation and the Gen X, right? And so we have two different paradigms in a way, right? I'm a young guy, Henry's a little bit older of a guy, and so we can kind of blend the mix of the two. And so again, even though we were never really forced to come up with this idea, it came very organically.
Absolutely, and you're getting the best of both worlds. You know what I mean? So it's like it just comes down to us. What we're giving you is the stuff that we're harvesting, from everyday life, right? It's the inspiration of the things that we go through. So me being older, you know what I mean? I can give you guys the game from a long term thing, and Joe's giving it to you from the here and now, the inspiration that, like, hey, this is what I'm doing now, you know what I mean? And the information that we're giving here, it runs hand in hand and helps somebody, you know what I mean? And that's our number one goal here, is that the information we're sharing with you is helpful, you know what I'm saying? So my thing is I always say, if I can save you 10 years, I did you a solid by being, foolish in the things that I've gone through in business, the wins, the losses, everything in between, so and you're a creative being, you know what I mean? That's why you always feel like inside of you, like, man, I got to do something. There's just that one thing that's coming. I don't know what it is, and I just can't put my finger on it. Like I said, it just feels like it's right outside of your reach. I'm 50 years old and I still feel that way. So whatever age you feel, or whatever age you're at and you feel this way, just know, like, you keep going. You know what I mean? If you're alive, you keep going. You know what I mean? And those that don't go after it or don't see it, it's because they settled. So you never want to live a life of settle, guys. Ever, ever, ever. It's not a good place to be. It's like you keep taking your inspiration from everyday life. You know what I mean? And you don't want to just walk through this life like you're asleep.
Exactly, because too many of us, myself included at times, like we all just kind of run through the motion, right? I mean, even whenever we're at a grocery store, right? It's the 10,000th time that we've been to the grocery store, so it's not like there's nothing really new, so we could just kind of autopilot through it. But there's a lot of opportunities in life for you to really come up with some ideas, or to really see the small nuance of things, and come at it from a very inquisitive light, because whenever you do that, well, now you're able to take in all forms of stimuli, even music, right? um there's a lot of music artists where they'll say like, hey, I've heard like a rapper be asked like, what are some people that inspire your music? And the guy like told him like a NBA player, um artist, like a painter, and his dad, right? Those are none of those are rappers, but he the essence of those things he garnered inspiration from. And so that's what I'm saying, right? Even like if you're at Walmart, you can kind of look at like the small nuance of, okay, well, how does Walmart approach these things, or whatever the case may be, and you can incorporate that into your business.
Yeah, very true. You know what I mean? And again, I was watching this podcast talking about Sam Walmart, and they went out there, and it's pretty crazy, how he just started this as a small little thing in his area, in Arkansas. And now it's like out there in that area, the Walmarts have taken over, you know what I mean? And it's blown up. And this is all from a guy that just had a small idea that, like, wouldn't it be cool? So, I know there's two sides to the Walmart. Some people are against it because it affects small business. But that's not the point I'm bringing across. The point I'm bringing across is that he had an idea, and all these years later, we see them everywhere. You know what I mean? So you have to have that vision, but it just takes that little bit of time, So you have to, like, take on that force focus, you know what I mean, and start, like, looking around. Stop looking at your situations and start looking at the situations around you. You know what I mean? Start looking and seeing and talking to people and asking, you know what I mean? And a lot of times people, believe it or not, they're kind of just like sleepwalking through life because they don't, I've asked this and I've asked direct like this. So, like, kind of like, what are the pain points? What is something like you wish you could automate? They just look at me like a deer in headlights. Like, I really don't know. It's just kind of, I do this every day. So it's one of those things where you might have to sacrifice your time and just, go hang out at their office, ask if you can just tail them for a day, you know what I mean? Shadow them and see where the need is, you know what I mean? And with that, a lot of times, like I said, when there's high stress involved and stuff like that, people don't think, people don't dream, you're not as creative. If you ever notice, like, the creative people, I see them at the park when I go walking. Like, I'll see them out there just painting. They'll put up their little easel and just sit out there and paint, and they're in nature. And I'm like, that's what stress-free looks like. These guys are just chilling right there, and they're not thinking about anything. And they got out of their house, they got out of their room, they got out of their comfort zone, and just went out there and painting and doing what they enjoy. And they probably going to paint that masterpiece, and somebody might see it walking by and say, hey, I'd like to buy that. You know what I mean? And so it kind of happens like that. And that's a reality of how things actually come into fruition.
Exactly. And, just really try to refocus your mindset, or to, adopt the mindset of the world is your library, right? There's inspiration everywhere. Just even the way that, buildings are made, the beauty of your town, or, there's so many things that can inspire you. And like Henry just said, right? If you talk to people who have their business, you can ask them the basic questions of, what got you into business, and what got you into this or that, or, what are your pain points? That way you can really try to get some inspiration, even some motivation, right? If you talk to someone who's really motivated, it'll rub off on you. And so, again, that's where what this episode is really about is, really use everything around you to not only to get new ideas, but to gain inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said, that just that relax, epiphany that hits you, it comes when you're more relaxed, you know what I mean? And realizing that when you're stressed, it's like, okay, well, I got to find a way to de-stress. So go back to some of our older podcasts. We talked a lot about that, mindset. I mean, so much gold right there, you know what I mean, to help you through, guys. But definitely, take some of this information that we're sharing with you. I hope it really helps you. Just knowing, like, that stagnant mind, it doesn't get you, creative. That gets you into the stress zone, and then that stress, keeps you from actually being creative and finding solutions, so and with that, you just want to focus, get a little bit more focus and helping people. And you're going to see that your ideas are going to start to flow once you put yourself out there. Because remember, you're creative and you're doing these things, but they're not so much for you. It's a service or a product you're trying to sell to a client. So why are you trying to create something that you might think they might need, when if you just get out there and ask, you're going to find it that much easier. You know what I mean? So with that said, guys, I want to bring Joe back on and ask him if he has any closing thoughts or ideas.
Yeah, again, just relax your mind. If you see that you're stressing yourself over, I need to come up with a solution, right? That's why the term sleep on it exists, right? Because
True.
sometimes you have to sleep on it. Sometimes you have to give it some time to really marinate in your mind. And, sometimes you'll even dream about a solution. That's happened to me a couple times. So, with that, I want to give a shout out to our community. If you're an entrepreneur tired of doing everything alone, we have a community that combines self-growth tools, community support, and weekly structure to help you focus and follow through with whatever you're trying to do. So that's at backtobrilliance.com. If you scroll down to our community section, you'll be linked up with like-minded people like you.
Well said. All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in and listening to our podcast. We appreciate you. We ask that you subscribe or leave a comment or review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. Until the next time, you guys stay blessed.
Bye-bye.